Well, hello again, hockey fans. Welcome back to THW Live. We have reached Thursday, July 15th, 2021. And normally, this would be the time that we would be out at our cottages. We would be out celebrating our summers. It would be full off season mode, a couple weeks after the free agency being over. No, we got an expansion draft. We got an NHL draft coming up. It's a big couple of weeks and it's going to be a crazy couple of weeks. So we really appreciate you taking the time to come in. This is actually going to be our last episode until both the expansion draft and the NHL draft, because we normally record this on Wednesday, even though we drop it on Thursday. Well, Wednesday happens to be the expansion draft, so we're not going to record that night. And then I think we'll have one more show in July, kind of on the night of free agency. We'll kind of do a little recap there. But right now I figure, let's dedicate this show to the NHL draft, because I know there's a lot of teams looking to the next round of talent. We want to get everybody ready. So to help us do that, somebody that you should already be following, especially if you follow the OHL, if you follow McKean's hockey, one of the really good kind of scouts that are out there. We welcome Brock Otten to THW Live. Hi, Brock.
Hey, Mark, how you doing?
I am doing well. How are you?
Good, thanks. You guys chose me for the last show before the draft. I'm honored.
Now, look, do you feel special?
I feel extremely special.
Okay. Mission accomplished then. We like to try to save the best for last when we can. So
I'll try not to disappoint.
You'll do just fine. It's great that you're joining us, fans. Getting ready for this draft, and there's so many questions. Like some years you have Connor McDavid, who's the clear number one. This year I think most people think Owen Power is going to be the number one. I guess we'll start there. There are some that believe that Owen Power is going to be the number one pick in the draft. Now there's some in Buffalo that might even think that a William Eklund or a Matty Beniers could go number one because they already have Rasmus Dahlin on their team. Question for you is, where do you think Buffalo goes with the first pick?
I still think they go with Power. I think when you look at some of the lists and some of the information out there from NHL scouts, Power does seem to be the unanimous choice. I think we in the media and some of the amateur scouts, I think, tried to make this a closer race than it probably is. I think if I was choosing, I think it would be a lot closer. But I do think that NHL scouts view Power as sort of that top choice, and I don't know if there's any doubt to it. I think, especially when you look at how he played at the World Championships, how he just stepped right in to that Canadian blue line, was playing very sparsely at the beginning, was one of the top defenders on that team by the end, helping them win gold. I mean, how many players in their draft year do that? And I think that proves to, how special of a player he actually is. And he's obviously already sort of announced that he's going to go back to Michigan for another year. And I think that's going to be good for his development. I don't know if any of the players from this draft class are going to make the NHL next year. And I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing, but right. I do see Power as sort of that all situations, top three defender. When all said and done, is he probably likely to be the best player out of this draft class? I'm sure there'll be a couple of guys who pass him, just the nature of the beast. But I would be shocked if he's not one of the top 5 or 6 from this draft class. And I think that sort of safeness to his selection also makes him that clear number one for a team like Buffalo, who just needs that extra anchor on the back end, somebody who can provide some stability to Rasmus Dahlin and Ristolainen and allow them to play a little bit more of their offensive game and provide a little bit more stability to that blue line.
Brock, I wonder this too. You brought it up just a minute ago with Power, and he's going to be returning to Michigan most likely. It's what he said during his media availability with the National Hockey League. So for a number one pick who was just at the World Championships, who demonstrated that he seems like that he can play at that similar level, what incentive is there, maybe besides the development, like you said, for him to go back to Michigan?
I think that you're going to see a lot of players in that same sort of situation elect to go back because this year didn't feel right. A lot of these players didn't get the experience that they were wanting. The NCAA players didn't really get the true capping to their season that that they wanted, and they probably didn't get to experience the sort of NCAA culture and being a college student, everything that is about, and representing Michigan with that M on your chest, that is very prestigious and has been worn by so many amazing players over the years. And not to mention, Michigan is going to have a crazy good team next year. They've got so many good young players, and they're going to have a great incoming class again. So they're going to have a great team. So there's an incentive there. But when you look across all these other leagues too, I mean, William Eklund has said the same thing about coming over and staying in Sweden for another year. I think a lot of these players just want to have sort of a normal season first before they make that jump. And I think that's very fair.
Now, kind of switching gears a little bit, Brock, how did you handle the time during the pandemic, especially you're close to the OHL, you pay a lot of attention to that. How were you actually able to pass the time when there was no hockey to watch?
Well, I guess you could say that it was very difficult. As you said, in Ontario, we didn't have really anything to watch. So at the beginning, I was kind of watching some of the other leagues that had started up. I was watching some of the USHL. I was watching some European stuff, with my role at McKean's. I felt it necessary to continue to watch some of the draft eligible players this year. And then as it became more and more likely that the OHL was not going to happen this year, we saw some players go overseas. So I started watching some of their games overseas to try to keep up with how they were progressing. And then once the OHL fully canceled, then the shift was sort of to watching a lot of their under 17 action from a year ago, right? Trying to get a better read on some of these guys. And it's very difficult, as you know, right?
Yep.
Not every U17 player comes into the league and steps onto a first power play unit and plays consistent ice time. When you look at some of the guys on the London Knights, when they're not scratched, they're playing 4 or 5 minutes a night. If it's a blowout, maybe they get some a little more action in the third period, but otherwise it's so inconsistent. And it was just, I think that's probably the best word to describe how scouting was in Ontario this year. And it was just inconsistent and very difficult to get a read on certain players. And I don't know how that's going to translate to the NHL draft. I would be shocked if we saw a lot of OHL players go in the first top 75. I think we're going to see a lot sort of in that sandwich area, in that late third, fourth, fifth round area. And then I don't know about the later rounds. Typically in the last few years, we've been seeing a lot of teams avoid the CHL in the later rounds, using their picks to draft out of Europe, to draft out of prep schools, to draft out of the USHL, because they get those extra few years of development before they have to sign them, right? So I don't know if we'll see a switch to, more players from the CHL being drafted later this year, or whether it's just a down year across the league because scouts are looking for more of that certainty, that certainty in terms of how they've progressed this year. And only a handful of players from Ontario really played. I know we had the Erie Showcase, and I know you were at that, Mark. And I think that at the beginning of that tournament, the quality of play was really, really strong. And I think as the tournament went on, I think it was very clear that some of the players were getting a little bit fatigued. And I think that some of the physicality really dropped off towards the end of that tournament. So I don't know really how much weight scouts are going to put on that tournament. It'll be really, really interesting to see. And like you sort of led into with the question, it was a tough year to scout Ontario.
Everything's just been tough. Yeah. And you perfect segue into the next thing I was going to ask you about was the whole, when you've got a league that didn't play in the OHL versus those that, the Brent Clarks of the world, the Mason McTavishes of the world, Frankie Pinelli's went overseas and played. So it's obviously going to help them. But later on in the draft, there's a lot of players that didn't get the chance to play. So do you feel as though that those that did get to play will automatically maybe get a little bit of a bump because they had an opportunity to play, maybe versus somebody that didn't?
You know what? That's a really good question, Mark. It's something that I've been asked a fair amount. The whole concept of how is not playing going to affect some of these guys, especially somebody like a Connor Lockhart. who
Perfect
you know
example.
well in Erie, right? Who didn't attend the Erie Showcase, did
Yep.
not go overseas, didn't play anywhere this year, was one of the highest picks in the OHL priority selection, one of the most talented kids in this age group, but nobody saw him play this year. And that's going to be hard, I think, for a lot of scouts to look past when their livelihood is on the line in terms of making a concrete assessment here. And I
Yep.
really don't know how that's going to affect it. I could see it going both ways. I could see a lot of teams really loading up on players in the later
Hmm.
rounds and in the mid rounds because there's those home run swings, right? If Connor Lockhart plays this year, maybe he's a first round pick. Maybe he's a top 20 pick, right? He is talented enough, but
Yeah.
maybe if he plays this year, he doesn't progress and he's not drafted at all. That's the chance that you take, right?
Hmm.
That's the real wild card here. And I think the really interesting thing too with some of the Ontario players is in a normal year,
Hmm.
scouting staffs are going to trust their regional scouts, right?
Yep.
You're going to have your scouting directors who are going to places to see a variety of players play, right? You're going to have your general managers who make the trek, but your regional scouts are sort of kept into that little box, right? This year, with some of these players like Mason McTavish, Brent Clark, Brennan Hoffman, Francisco Pinelli, or Francisco Arcuri, there's that opportunity for a lot of that cross scouting. So you're going to have your Ontario scouts who followed these kids from a younger age who have a really good idea about their games. But
Hmm.
now you've got an opinion from, your Swiss scout, your Central European scouts, some of your other European scouts, your head European scouts who probably made a trek to watch them play if they had any sort of interest in them, right? So I feel like that's another interesting dynamic that will be something to follow on draft day. Is in a normal year there wouldn't be this many strong opinions about some of these Ontario players. So I don't
Yep.
know if that's something that is going to be held against them because there's going to be more people who have a negative opinion versus a positive opinion. It's a, like I said, the whole region is such a wild card for a variety of different reasons.
Yeah, absolutely. Brock Otten from McKean's Hockey joining us here on THW Live. And every time that I get somebody on, Brock, to talk about the draft, especially someone who's in a position, media related or scouting related, everybody creates the list with what, their own approach. And I just think there's a couple of different groupings of players that I'm very interested in how you came up with your particular list. You talked about Owen Power at the beginning being the number one. There's three other defensemen, though, that are kind of called the top 4D in Simone Edmondson and in Brent Clark and in Luke Hughes that I think any team would be happy to take. But when you look at those three in particular, that each have a little something different to offer, how do you differentiate them in terms of your rankings?
I think it just depends on your individual biases in terms of the things that you look for
Mm.
in a player and a defenseman in particular, right?
Yep.
These are very, while they do have similar upsides, I think, in terms of being NHL players, I think that currently they're all very different, right? You've got Luke
Yeah.
Hughes as one of the youngest players available in the draft who suffered an injury this year, didn't get to play in the U18s. So that's sort of something that, it's not a red flag or anything, but it does make it a little bit more challenging to assess him, given that American team at the U18s didn't really play up to the standard that we would usually hold them to.
Mhm.
Um, there's probably a lot of physical growth and development still available there, but he's definitely the most raw of the three. The skating is tremendous, easily a top three skater, top five skater in this draft at any position. It's just a matter of how the rest of his game sort of comes together, right? Uh, and then you've got Brant Clark, who is sort of the exact opposite. The skating is the thing that people talk about as the one area for him that needs to grow. Whereas it's the mind and his ability to process the game, which is such an asset. And the physical tools maybe aren't at the level of a kid like Luke Hughes. And then you've got Simon Edmondson, who I feel like has sort of developed a very polarizing following. You either really like him or you
You
don't
don't.
believe that he's a top 10 pick, right? And it's very hard because, you watch the U18s, for example, and Edmondson's worst games were probably against Canada. So a lot of people are going to point to that and say, what does this mean? Is this something that is worth attaching meaning to, or is it something that is, he had a bad game? Who cares if it was against Canada or Latvia or the US, right? You're not going to be perfect at that age. If you look at his tournament, the rest of that tournament, he was unbelievable, I think. Just against Canada, he wasn't great. And again, for him, the question mark would be, okay, why are there these inconsistencies in his performances? Is it decision-making based? Is there something with his, for lack of a better term, hockey sense that is a bit of a red flag? What's he going to be at the next level? Is he a dominant 2A defender? Is he more of a defensive guy at the NHL level? So you have three very, very different players. So I think it really just depends what you sort of put emphasis on. At McKean's, the one thing that we do tend to put a lot of emphasis on is skating ability. So that, Edmondson and Hughes are two guys that are going to be pushed quite high up because of their ability to skate, whereas Clark was somebody we even contemplated switching with Mason McTavish in our rankings, just the way that we do things.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, and I think that NHL teams are going to approach this the same way. And I think you see that in the biases of their draft lists every single year. You see some teams, like the Toronto Maple Leafs, for example, where skating deficiencies do not scare them, right? It's all up here for them. It's how they process the game. And those are the players that they're really targeting. The players that have that high-end vision, the guys that maybe aren't the most physically developed, but they believe in their development program and in their ability to improve skating, improve strength, and improve other areas of a player's game. Whereas you have somebody like your Columbus Blue Jackets, Mark, where skating is definitely something that organization seems to really emphasize in their draft selections, right? So you see it in the organizations as well, just as much as the independent scouting agencies.
Yeah, and if you're a Blue Jackets fan, I know some of you will be listening to this. It would not surprise me in the least, given that they haven't taken a D in since 2016 in the first two rounds. And what you mentioned about they love to get skaters. That's Simone Edmondson's music. But we'll see how that all shakes out. So I want to ask you a couple more here, Brock. How do you rate the goalies, especially when you have a couple like Wallstedt and Costa that could potentially go high? Like, how do you incorporate them into the top talent when you're developing a list?
It's a really good question. I think you have to, for us anyway, we trust sort of our regional scouts who have an idea in terms of a comparison to other goalies that have come from that region, right? So our Western scouts, have seen guys like Carter Hart come through the system. I've seen guys like Carey Price come through the system. They've also seen some lower level guys come through the system, and they have a pretty good grasp of what makes a high-end goaltending prospect, right? And I think you just have to trust your regional scouts in terms of where you feel those goaltenders would slot in. And, our Swedish scouts throughout the year, we changed hands a few times, but they were consistent in Jesper Wallstedt being a high-end goaltending prospect. And same thing out west. We had Sebastian Casa in the first round right at the beginning of the year before it even started, because our Western scouts liked him so much. And then we continued to sort of creep him up the list over the course of the season. And then obviously I championed for Ben Gaudreau pretty hard in our final rankings. I felt like to start the year, I didn't feel comfortable, considering that he hadn't played. I didn't feel comfortable having him sort of near that first round, but he's near that first round, just outside of it anyway in our final list. And I think he deserves to be there. And I think in the case of Gaudreau, I think if the OHL season had played, I think we're talking about him in the same light as those two. I think we're talking about not, Wallstedt and Casa, but Wallstedt, Casa, and Gaudreau. I really do. I do truly believe that. I think he's a phenomenal goaltender. And I think when you look at the history of his progress too, I remember when he was draft eligible coming out of the North, playing for that NOHA team at different tournaments and whatnot. I had so many scouts tell me, and I'm sure you can attest to the same sort of thing when you were doing your work for the OHL draft, that said, this is the best goaltender to come through the OHL draft in a decade. And, I think we're sort of seeing it with how he's played so far. He had a pretty good rookie year on a really, sorry, Sarnia, but not a good Sarnia team. And, then his performance at the U18s where he was the goaltender of the tournament.
Yeah.
And if he had played more, I really do think that Sarnia would have been pretty good this year. Not amazing, but I think they would have definitely been improved. And then we're adding him into the mix. So, yeah, it is one of those things. We do have a separate way of grading the goalies, obviously, but it does calculate our sort of average called an OFP that we do use to sort of objectively slot players in before we start to use the eye test. And I mean, some of those do get a little high, and then there's sort of some auto correction depending on how high they get. Again, it's very difficult to try to blend them.
Yeah.
But I think the one thing you see is some of the places that try to keep them separated. I remember, I think Hockey Prospect did it a couple of years ago, and now they're back to blending because ultimately, it's difficult, but it's what people want, right? And you have to give your consumers what they want, and they don't want a separate goaltending list. It's fine for NHL Central Scouting because that's a different entity. That's not for necessarily the fans. That's for NHL organizations. But for the independent scouting agencies, where people are fans who are buying the product to find out about the players their organization is going to draft, for their keeper leagues that they're drafting for any sort of that information, they want it blended together, right? So as difficult as it is, you have to sort of figure out a way.
Yes. Brock, I want to give you a chance to talk about something that you do periodically throughout the year, and there should be the last installment either out or coming out soon, the OHL media polls that you guys do. And I know sometimes I partake in them. This year without the games, I didn't feel too comfortable in partaking in them, but I'll probably be back in the future for that. But just those who aren't familiar with it, just give them what is it exactly, and then who partakes in it, and what do you guys get out of it?
Well, Mark, you missed the boat. Now you denied me this year. I'm not going to send another invite, man. It's it. You missed it.
Once and done. Lesson learned.
No. So basically what it is the one thing that I feel like has always sort of been a void from regional coverage is sort of that cumulative voice. So, geez, I want to say probably about 8, 9, 10 years ago. I'm not even sure. It was something that I started to do, just reaching out to people to see the scouts that cover the region, the media personalities that cover the region, people who really know these players. And it's a mix, right? And you can attest to that. It's color commentators, it's scouts for independent scouting agencies. It's a variety of different people, more journalist types as well.
Nice mix.
Yeah, it's a nice mix of people, and it does give a nice perspective too. And I think that's sort of something that I've always tried to do as well, mix in different perspectives on these players for the quotes. So basically what I do is I send out a poll to various members of the media that I'm in contact with, so scouts, media members, journalists, you name it, and ask them for their top 10 players in the OHL region. And then from there, I combine all the lists through sort of a weighted scale and come up with a sort of consensus. And then each person sort of provides some sort of off the cuff comments on each player, and we throw it all together, and it ends up being a pretty good read, if I don't say so myself. And there's always a good cast of characters who provide. It's not always the same, like you said, Mark. Sometimes there's situations that come up where people don't feel comfortable. This year was very particularly tough for me to get people, just because the OHL didn't play. So a lot of people like yourself just didn't feel comfortable, providing that sort of input, which is totally fine. But still the Corey Promins, the Scott Wheelers, Dylan Galloway at Future Considerations, Sam McGilligan at McKean's with us contributed this year. We've always had a variety of different people. I know I'm missing lots of different folks, but that's the goal, is to try to get as many different voices into this poll as possible, and it ends up with a pretty good product.
That's good stuff. And now, fans, that's something. If you get an opportunity, he does a really good job with that. So get the opportunity to go ahead and give that a read. We're going to end with just a couple of quick hitters here, a couple of fan questions, and then a couple of questions I had for you, just real quick impressions here. So had a couple fans ask about Fabian Lysell and Atu Radi, as in, where do you feel like, I feel like they're probably first round talents, but where do you feel like that they ultimately go?
I agree. I think they're first round talents. I think that we probably see them both go in the latter half of the first round as opposed to the beginning half of the first round, like we would have anticipated at the beginning of the year. But I think that the potential for both of them is just too high for somebody to let them both slip out of the first round. I mean, stranger things have happened,
Yep.
but when you look at Lysell, who is one of the better skating forwards available this year, with the priority put on skating right now in the NHL, I'd be shocked if he sneaks out of the or lasts longer than the first round.
I personally think he's one of the top 5 players in this draft, but that's just me. Everyone's got their opinion. How about Frankie Pinelli? You think he's a first rounder?
I think he's on the bubble. I think it's going to really depend on how teams view his skating. I think they're going to really. I worry that he's one of those guys that teams like, but there's always that guy that they like just a little bit more. And we tend to see those types sort of fall a little bit. I'm not saying that, he's going to be somebody that's drafted 50th or 55th, but I could see him, being one of the early second round picks and not being drafted in the first, only because I do feel like there is a bit of a projection issue with him. Given his skating abilities.
And then just a couple of guys later on in the draft that you maybe would classify as some of your personal favorites, Brock.
First one would be Ty Voigt for sure, and I know I'm not the only one on the
You're not the only one. He was good in Erie too, so
not the only one on that bandwagon. I just see a really electric and dynamic playmaker and a guy who plays the game the way that the NHL is playing right now, right? Who I think can really fit in as that pace pusher, that somebody who, is able to make quick decisions with the puck. And I think that if the OHL had played, I think we'd be talking about him as a potential top 40 selection. I really do. So that'd be number one. Number two, I will give you, let's go with somebody from another region. I'm going to give you Sean Chagall from the Calgary Hitmen out in the WHL. He was one of the best draft eligible players in the last 10, 12 games in the WHL. He was almost at 2 points per game and was playing some unbelievable hockey. And this is not just somebody out of thin air. This was a really high bantam selection as well, who brings speed, brings physicality. He's a potential goal scorer. I saw recently, actually, ISS Hockey had him in the first round, which is the highest that I have definitely seen him. But I would not be shocked if somebody jumps at him a lot earlier than some of the rankings have him. And I know, again, I'm not the only one on his bandwagon either.
Now, Voigt and Nemestikov is going to be a fun combination if and when the OHL gets going. I can't wait to see that. And just the last thing I want to give you the opportunity to do, just kind of plug McKeen's. What have you guys done to get prepared for the draft? I know you guys just recently released your draft guide, so just give you an opportunity to talk about what you guys have done.
Yeah, so the draft guide is out now. So you can get a digital copy through McKeen's, but we are also offering a print copy this year. So you can buy that also on McKeens.com, McKeensHockey.com. And then obviously there is the option to subscribe to. So you can buy a subscription with the guide or just the guide itself. But the actual better deal is subscribing to our content, which I think is obviously very, very high end. And that's definitely a resource that you're going to want before the NHL draft. So you know who your team is selecting. And I think we did a really good job on the draft guide this year. And from a personal standpoint, you can find my own personal list for Ontario on my site, OHL Prospects. The media poll will be coming out anytime soon as well.
Well, this has been outstanding, fans. Make sure you do follow Brock and all his work at OHL Prospects. Wonderful resource for you, Brock. Thank you very much for the time and joining us, helping us get ready for the NHL draft. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Mark. Appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. So fans, stay tuned. Part 2 is going to come up. We're going to have our rankers. We're going to have more NHL draft talk. So stay tuned. All right, you have reached part 2 of THW Live. I am your host, Mark Scheig. We are back here Thursday, July 15th, 2021, and we now have our resident rankers here getting us ready for the NHL draft. Again, this is going to be our last episode before both the expansion draft and the NHL draft. So this is going to be kind of our final chance to get you guys ready for the craziness that's going to be July 23rd and 24th and what teams are thinking about here. So to help us with that, Matt Zator, Andrew Forbes, Pater Baracchini, welcome back to the show, guys.
Thanks, Mark.
Good to be here.
Happy to be here.
We appreciate it always. You guys have done fantastic work. And I guess, Matt, we'll start with you on this. Since we are just a few days away here from the draft, I think most of you guys think Owen Power is going to go number 1, but I was on that call with the league where they had, Power and a lot of the other prospects on there. And there was a lot of Buffalo media on the William Eklund call. That's because there's some rumblings that they might be interested in going forward. And if they do, it might be him. What would you pin the chances of someone other than Owen Power going number 1 in your mind, Matt?
I'm at 70%. I just from the rumblings of Eklund kind of coming out in the Buffalo media, like you said, it's not really surprising when you look at the talent that Eklund has and the amount of skill that guy possesses. So I mean, I think that it's not a surprise that he could go first overall. I had him in the top 5, top 3 there for most of the year, so I wouldn't be surprised if he gets picked there. I'm pegging at 70%.
Off with a high number. Spicy start to this one. Andrew, what do you say?
I'm going to go a little bit higher than Matt. I'm going to go 78%.
Wow.
No, I think there's a very good chance that Owen Power isn't going first overall. And just to what both of you said, I think right now Buffalo is in a tough spot, and you're not going to build it around Owen Power and Rasmus Dahlin. You're going to have to get somebody up front, and we've seen it today. Jeff Skinner's on the way out, probably opens up a lot of space if they can move that contract, and the potential for Eichel to be somewhere else at the beginning of next season is definitely in. Well, I mean, we've all seen the rumblings, so. You're going to need somebody to build around up front, and I think William Eklund is going to be that guy. I haven't come out with my final rankings yet, but we can spoil it right here. I've got Eklund number 1, with knowing that Buffalo's taking that pick.
Hello, that's spicy start, Peter. You just as spicy as Matt and Andrew are?
Yeah, I'm gonna do something that's been on the Price is Right and just one up Andrew and go 80%. That Owen Power will not be selected number 1. And Matt, yourself, and Andrew nailed it on the head. Especially with all the rumblings going on right now, it's more likely they're going to take a forward, whether that is William Eklund or possibly Matthew Beniers, who is a solid 2-way talent. Yep. It makes more sense for them to go with the forward and rebuild, especially if they are going to lose Jack Eichel, than go with the defenseman and have 2 left-hand guys. Potential number 1 pairings in Dahlin, and probably putting Owen Power on that second spot isn't going to make much sense. Even though I have Owen Power first overall, it wouldn't surprise me if either Eklund or Beniers goes to Buffalo.
And I'm going to play the Price is Right with you guys, and I'm going to bid $1 because that's the way that it works. If I feel like you overbid, I honestly do think it's 50-50. His Power's still a really good player. They might end up taking him. He's got some Buffalo connections, but you all make great points about, if Jack Eichel is gone, if Sam Reinhart is gone, are you going to really rebuild around Owen Power in that situation? That's a question they have to answer. So it'd be really interesting to see where it goes. So Andrew, we're going to start with you on question number 2. And I just wonder, in your opinion, who is the most interesting team to watch on draft night, and why do you think that is the case?
Well, I think there's 2 answers for me on this one, and you're going to be happy. I think Columbus is definitely one, especially if you're talking about the first round. I mean, they've got three solid picks, and it's going to be very interesting to see what they do. They've got a lot of movement this offseason, obviously with Tortorella leaving. it's gonna be interesting to see what they can do with those 3 picks. I do think that they move one, and see what they can add with giving away a first round pick. Possibly the Leafs are in the hunt for one of those picks. But I think they're going to be interesting, and I think another one that is going to be interesting, and this kind of ties into one of your topics a little bit later, are the Arizona Coyotes. And just because there's a lot surrounding what they do in this draft, they're where they go from here on out is going to be, it's all riding on these next few drafts, and they don't have a lot of picks. So I think all eyes are going to be on them right now.
Great point. What do you think, Peter?
I'm still looking at the Detroit Red Wings. Not in a bad sense, but mainly because they're already in a great spot. And Steve Yzerman has done a great job of filling up the prospects pool, especially with more Sider. Jonathan Berggren is making great strides. Lucas Raymond is an elite level talent winger. If chances are he's going to have, he is in the top 10. If he has another solid pick around that 6th spot, whether it could be another Swede like Fabian Lysell, if he does decide to go with another defenseman in Luke Hughes or even Mason McTavish. I know, I believe Devin took him in our mock draft. He's got a lot of solid options, especially if he wants to build up front right now, or even if Brent Clark falls to him, he has multiple options to take with that first pick. And even 22nd overall, can he take a goalie if Sebastian Koza is there? Does he take a D in that spot and afford at the 6th spot? So it's going to be interesting to see how things play out with him, but they're going to be having a really tremendous draft as they did last year.
Absolutely. And Matt, you get the final word on the most interesting team or teams you think will be what you'll be watching.
I'm going to change my answer because just to make it interesting, I was going to say Detroit, but just to make it interesting, I'm going to go with the Toronto Maple Leafs. And because the fact they have no first round pick again, and with the disappointment again in the first round getting kicked out, and they got to start building their prospect pool again. And they do still have a young core of players, but I think they need to get back into the first round, get quality pick. And the thing is, they don't even have their 2nd round pick is quite late as well. So they may still get a solid player in the 2nd round, but I think they have to do a lot, try to get that first round pick, like Andrew said about the Columbus Blue Jackets trying to get one of their picks or something, because they're going to start getting up against it with their prospect pool.
Now, I'll just speak since Columbus came up a couple of different times. They can do so many different things. I agree. They're going to be one of the most interesting teams. I think they hold on to 5. I think they lean D just because they haven't drafted one in a few years high. With Seth Jones on the way out. Yarmo already has said that he's gotten a lot of calls about the back end first round picks from a lot of different general managers. So he'll use them if it's going to be an improvement, beyond this year as well. So with so many different ways that they go, they might just elect to choose all 3 picks. Just the variance of what they can do is going to be very interesting for them. So Peter, we're going to start with you with question number 3. And this is going to be dangerous territory, fans, just to give you all a little bit of perspective. We're going to try and dive into the heads of our rankers here. So just a little bit of a fair warning. So Peter, when you're developing a list, especially when you're doing a draft list, I think most people agree that the later you get, the more similar the kind of player that you're going to have available. What do you do to separate different players that are similar when you're trying to come up with a final ranking, let's say?
Yeah, this is my first year doing the rankings so it's really difficult, especially in this draft year where you don't have a lot of information on the players, video quality, scouting reports and everything like that. So you have to learn as the year goes on. But as I was making my list and as it got into past the top 10, where it goes into the 11 to 15, 16 to 20, and later on in the rounds, I try to just base it off of the skill sets. Like, is it still worthy of being in the top 15 or even in that 10 to or 11 to 20 spot of having such quality talent? For example, I use Chaz Lucius, Xavier Burgo, and Francesco Pinelli as players that still have that high end level talent that it can possibly not get into the top 10, but still have that framework of being a solid mid-round selection given their potential of what they could possibly be as a prospect. Granted, different skill sets, like Lucius is a shooter, Borgo is a two-way player, and Pinelli is a really great playmaker. So I think I was trying to get into that mindset of trying to have a good placement of where everybody is based on their skill set.
All right, Matt, what kind of things do you look at when you're creating a list, especially when you get a little bit deeper in the draft?
My biggest thing, and it's gone back before I started looking at prospects really deep, is the work ethic and motor. I mean, you can't get anywhere in the NHL. You can't get anywhere without a good work ethic and a strong motor, and you hear that a lot. You got guys that have skill, and they don't have a good work ethic, and they never get as far as where get the highest point of their careers without that. I look at an example like Alex Burrows. He never was drafted, but he became a skilled player because of his work ethic, and he just never quit. And I think that puts a guy ahead of, you look at skill and you look at work ethic. I think that puts a guy ahead in my mind. If between two players, you're looking at their motor and their work, how they work, and the level that they work, I think that's a big thing for me.
And Andrew, you get the final word on what the kinds of things you look at when you're developing a list.
Well, I go off of both of what these guys said, but I think on top of that, you're looking at comparables. So you look at games, as much video as we can get on some of these players, and see where they stack up against, former draft picks and how far they made it, and did they make the NHL? It comes down to, as Matt said, the work ethic. I think comparables are huge. I think one of the biggest things is trusting yourself. So I'll go off of Matt here and say, he's been on the Coronado train since day one. And if you look at a lot of other rankings, Coronado didn't really climb until the later part of the year. And even then, I mean, they're certainly not as high up as Matt's got them. But you got to trust yourself. You got to trust your instincts. We've been all watching the game for as long as we can remember. You got to know what these guys can bring. And on top of that, I just think knowing the comparables, knowing that, and I forgot my last point. I was going somewhere with that, but I think it comes down to just being able to, use some of the recency bias. Anybody that says that they rank without using recency bias, it's a lie. You're using, like we saw some of these players play this year. We didn't see others. And because of that, I think you saw a few of them drop a little bit in the ranks, not significantly, but you'll see them drop, to the later part of the first round or middle of first round, where they might've been a top 10 pick had they had an opportunity to play.
And if you're just joining us, it's THW Live for July 15th. We have our rankers, Matt, Andrew, and Peter joining us, and we're getting ready for the NHL draft. And Matt, we'll go back to you for this one, kind of segueing about, kind of how, players can be a little bit similar as you get later in the draft. Do we have the recipe for a lot more trades of picks than maybe in a normal year, especially if maybe one team is real high on someone and maybe some others aren't, maybe that player didn't play or whatever the situation might be. Do we have the recipe for a lot more trades in your opinion?
I think we're going to see a lot of trades. More the first and second round. I think there's going to be a lot more than in previous years because, like you said, there's a lot of similar players, and the fact that there is a lot of players that a lot of teams didn't see, and not a lot of it. And the thing is, there's going to be guys in the second round, like we saw in our mock draft. We saw guys like Othman going down to the second round when he's been ranked in the first. Svozil dropped into the second round, and he was supposed to be ranked in the first round by a lot of places. And I think you're going to see a lot of that happening, where you're going to trade pick because you think, a second round pick is as good as a first, so maybe trade your first and get a few, a couple seconds from another team. So that has a lot. So I think there's going to be a lot more potential for movement. I don't know if it's all going to come to fruition, but I think there's going to be a lot of talk. That's for sure.
What do you think, Andrew?
Yeah, I'm on the same boat. I think this is the year to do it. I talked about the Coyotes and not having a lot of picks. there's potential here for them to move pieces, from within the organization to maybe acquire some picks and have the potential to move up in this draft. It's just that there's so many similar players, and like we mentioned, there's a lot of players that there wasn't a lot of video on. Teams are going to have to trust themselves and trust their scouts and know what they're looking at and know who they're going after. And if they think they can get a guy in the third round that maybe normally would be a, upper second round pick, that's something that, they have to consider moving, as Matt mentioned, for multiple picks later in the draft.
All right, Peter, get the final word on this one.
I'm probably just going to keep this short and sweet. Matt and Andrew nailed it on the head perfectly. I mean, scouts are going to have their own scouting reports, and they're going to have an idea of who they want. So they're going to do whatever they can to try and get that pick, move up or down, and select the best player available in their mind. And I'm probably just going to repeat what they said, but I'm just looking forward to how things are going to unfold right now.
Yeah, I think it's going to be explosive. I'll even use that word, because everybody's opinion is different. And if they foresee an opportunity, whoever can find the most hidden gems later in the draft could really make a killing. So we'll see where it goes. Andrew, just got a couple more questions for you. We're going to start with you on favorite player outside of the first round on your rankings and why.
I've been on the Evan Naus train for, I don't know, you guys have heard me talk about him countless times now. In my May rankings, I had him at 46. He'll be a little bit higher for me in the final rankings, but I mean, he's a guy that put in the work, and Matt talked about work ethic. He's a guy that went from team to team to team to get through his junior career to get to where he wanted to be. And, even with a stop in the USHL, wherever he could get eyes on him. And the best part about him is that the whole time he played consistent play. He's a defensive defenseman. He's a guy that, doesn't mind getting in the grimy areas. He skates well. His hockey IQ is through the roof. He communicates on the ice like nobody else. Peter's got a great scouting report out on this kid. So if you can, head over to the Hockey Writers and check it out, because this kid's going to be a solid pickup. And I could see him going right on the fringe between the first and the second round.
And quite frankly, if you're listening or watching us, you should be clicking on the 2021 NHL Draft Guide that gets new stuff every day. You'll never be bored. You could read it for consecutive days and still have something new to read. So I'd highly encourage you to go check that out. Peter, what do you say?
I'm going to stick with the defensive pattern right here and say Olen Zellweger from the Everett Silvertips. Looking up on him before the U18s, I was slowly becoming a fan of his based on his mobility, his shot, and his offensive awareness. But I saw that next level, as Matthew alluded to, his work ethic, his motor, his ability to drive a play going forward. It's very similar to that of Samuel Girard of the Colorado Avalanche, is one comparable that I'm seeing quite a lot of. And, given how people are going to knock on his size and everything like that, that's irrelevant at this point, because he could drive a play going forward. He could take control of a power play, shoot the puck on net, great passing awareness. I'm really high on him. I have him ranked 50th on my final rankings, but if he is going higher, and I know some scouting services have him as a first rounder, it would not surprise me at all if some team's going to pounce on that opportunity.
All right, Matt, what about you for your favorite player outside of round one, and why?
I'm going to go with Red Savage. And biggest thing for me, again, is that work ethic. And he impressed me quite a bit during the under 18s. I mean, he took every key face-off for Team USA. USA didn't go very far in that tournament, but every time I watched a game, and he was noticeable. I mean, he kills penalties. He's probably one of the hardest working guys on the ice. And I think he's going to be drafted a lot higher than a lot of places think, just because of that. And a lot of teams, like you saw the value of those types of players in the playoffs or Tampa Bay Lightning. That third line just drove play almost every time. Savage really reminds me of that type of third line center that you're going to have that'll drive a line in the playoffs. And I think he's probably one of my favorites.
All right. One last question for the group. Peter, we'll start with you here. Just give me the team or teams that you feel like has the most pressure on them to do really well in this draft.
that for me?
Peter, did we
First?
lose you? Peter looks like he's
Oh, he
frozen. He looks frozen. Well, Matt, we'll start with you on that one. Just team under the most pressure and why to hit at this.
I'm probably going to guess. Oh,
guys, that's sorry. This can be edited. So, can you hear us, Peter?
Yeah, I can hear you. Is everything okay?
Yeah, you're cutting in and out on my end anyway.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
I can hear you. I don't know if it.
This has never happened before. Wow.
Yeah, you're frozen on the screen. No, that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, the power of editing is going to be very helpful for us here. So.
Oh man.
Peter, do you want to try to disconnect and reconnect?
Yeah, hang on. Let me just try it. Yeah,
go for it.
All right. Yeah, something's up with my computer right now.
If he comes back, if he comes back, you can take that segment over if you want.
Absolutely. We'll start with that question. Yeah.
Yeah.
At least it kept his face here for us.
Such a pretty face, that Peter.
Hey, making the rest of us look good, eh?
Oh. Right.
So what are you hearing out of Columbus then?
I think they're really looking hard at Edmondson 5th.
Yeah.
Yeah, the skating, the size, and he's prototypical Blue Jacket, even though I don't think they should take him at 5.
No. You think he'd slide a little bit, eh?
I think he's more like in the 10-11 range kind of thing, in my opinion. But
yeah,
I know Yarmo's track record. Now, after last year, I'm not going to guess, but
yeah.
I really think they're looking at Edmondson because they haven't drafted D in a while, and they're bare. At least they have a few forwards in their system, like Marchenko and Chinakhov, but D-wise, they're very bare.
Yeah.
But the back end 2 first rounders, though, Voigt is somebody that I think they'd be very interested in. Tuamala is somebody I think they'd be very interested in.
Mm-hmm.
They have some. Roddy is another one. They have some really interesting options.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of what their list looks like.
Yeah. Roddy's going to be interesting to see what happens, because a guy that was projected to be a first overall pick, and that skill is still there, and we'll see what happens with him.
And if there's anybody that would know him, it might be the Finn Yarmo, right? Yeah, I saw they theoretically could have landed like Eklund, Ratty, and somebody else with their 3 first rounders. I've seen some interesting mocks of the way that of how it just played out. So Lysell too. That'd be a sick collection of talent right there if they could land Ratty and Lysell together.
Oh geez.
Hello.
Hey, there he is.
Oh, this 2011 Mac. I'm telling you, it's giving me nightmares right now. Thank God stores are starting to open up.
Absolutely. So we'll start completely fresh with the last segment. I'll just start with the question. We'll go to you first, and then this is the last question anyway. So
all right, sounds good.
Okay. All right, just one more question for you guys here on the night. So Peter, just which team do you feel like is under the most pressure to really nail this draft, and why?
I'm going to say the Boston Bruins. And looking at their prospect pool, there's really not a whole lot of substance there. Kind of like a lot of depth options, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th defensive pairings or defensemen. lot of bottom six type of players like Trent Frederick, who's coming up right now. But I really think they need to go and get a solid top six, top four option right now that can make a significant impact down the line. With the recent news of Kevin Miller with his retirement, you're going to have to get in some bodies right now, and you're going to have to develop that pipeline. So if you're looking for a defenseman, there's going to be some really quality names in that late round. Could they try and pick up a Carson Lambos or a Stanislav Svozo, as we talked about before? I think there's going to be a bit of pressure on them this draft to try and refill that prospect pool, because their window is not necessarily closing, but if they want to be competitive, they got to go back into the pipeline when they need to.
Hey, Matt, what do you think?
I'm going to go, it's obvious. I'd say it's the Buffalo Sabres. And, the way their turmoil that's happening in that city with, two stars potentially being out by the end of the offseason. And, they have to draft the right player. And like we've discussed earlier about who they're picking and who they're going to be building around ultimately. And I think, it's almost a foregone conclusion that Eichel's gone. And that was their star that they were going to be building around for the next decade or so. And he's been there for a while already. And there's nothing seemed to be happening. So, getting a guy like Eklund or Beniers and building around them and trying to be successful there, I think is huge for them moving forward. And they have some picks later on, a high second rounder as well, that could potentially be as valuable as the first.
Andrew, final word on the night on the team that you feel like might have the most pressure on them.
Yeah, I mean, I think you guys gave great answers. I think I mentioned it earlier in the show. I think for me, it's the Arizona Coyotes. Just if you look in their system right now, their pipeline is like you mentioned with Columbus. It's bare. It's non-existent at this point. They've got guys like Liam Kirk and players like that, but. And then you talk about how their first round pick this year is forfeited. Obviously, that's not going to help their case. So I think they're in a tough position. I think Arizona's always been in a tough position. You want to talk financial side of the business as well. So for them, they need to nail it down, and they need to find a way to get back into relevancy, because right now it's not happening out in the desert.
Really well said by all of you, Matt, Andrew, Peter. Our resident rankers here at the Hockey Writers done tireless work all year to get their final rankings ready, and we're about to see where it all goes from there. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us here on the Big Show. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you.
Happy to be here.
Thanks, guys. So a couple house cleaning items here. Remember, you won't miss any of our interviews. Hit that like button on Facebook. Hit subscribe on YouTube. We're available on all the platforms, so you won't miss Brock, our rankers, or any of the other interviews that we do. We're going to go with one more show before we take a break for the summer. Next week, like I said, we're going to have it's the expansion draft night, so we're not going to tape. The following week is the night of free agency. We're going to kind of have a night one recap of all the free agency, and then we're going to take the whole month of August off, kind of catch our breath a little bit, and maybe enjoy a little bit of a summer. I'm sure you guys are looking forward to that too. And then in September, we're going to come back and slowly start to work our way back toward an October, hopefully regular season start for a full 82 games, God willing, at this point. But that's the plan. We really appreciate you taking the time to, listen to us and, enjoy what's about to unfold. The expansion draft, the NHL draft, free agency. It's going to be wild. There's going to be things that we're not going to expect. So make sure your phones are charged. Make sure that your refresh button works for Twitter. Until then, have a great night. We'll actually see you in 2 weeks here on THW Live. Take care.